look, there is parental responsibility. I mean, we are going to sing that until we meet the Lord. Okay. Yeah. You must be responsible for your children. But the point that I am ultimately making here is that the parents are doing that against the grain in this culture today.
Yeah.
Because we are in a culture that says to the parents, no, you step back, we'll take it from here.
Except when something like this happens.
Boom. Boom. Thanks for checking out Culture Proof. I'm Miki.
And I'm Will.
And today we're doing a Friday news haul that is kind of a sober edition where we're looking at the Georgia school shooting and then also the new information to come out regarding the Covenant school shooter. Why was this so difficult for us to come by? I know what we read in the media and why we are supposed to believe that this information is being kept from us. But there's something else that's sinister afoot. And we're going to talk about that. Then also I want to talk about an article that I talked about many years ago. This was back in 2019, where the outlet Vice ran an article that discussed the psychological makeup, or sort of like what mass shooters all have in common, depending on the type of mass shooting that is carried out. And we're going to talk about why I think that's important as we look at what happened in Georgia just this past week. These things are preventable.
Yeah,
I know we don't often like to talk about that, and the reasons that we would give for how they can be prevented often like to obscure the real reasons that these kinds of things are happening. Look, there's just evil among us, and whether we believe it or not, it's spreading. Our kids are being discipled online, and there are certain characteristics that all of these kids who are troubled in this way have in common. We don't want to talk about it. We don't like it, but we can't be helped if we won't admit that there is indeed a problem.
Definitely. There's a reality that, like you said, evil is among us, sin is in the world. And also, when we see these things happen, we got to understand that we have a real enemy.
Yeah.
And that he desires to steal, kill, and destroy. Yep. And so that's the way that he operates. And so when we look at, these individuals or these people, we have to understand the spiritual nature of what has happened,
that's right.
And what that does even to a nation, it's amazing that we can see these things and we can move past them, without really kind of surveying our hearts and surveying where we are as a country.
Yeah.
There may be studies that come out, things like that, but we don't actually stop. I wonder what it would take for us to stop and to say, man, okay, something is like, we need to look towards God.
Yeah.
That's usually is not the case. That's right. Not where we look.
Yeah, no, that's the job of the believer. That's the job of the Christian. Right. Like those who don't know God are not going to.
Well, there's no hope. Really.
Exactly right. And they don't have that sense of hope. Mm-hmm. And so that's the job of the Christian, to bring that hope to the conversation and to even have these kinds of national conversations that revolve around the spiritual implications of what we're seeing. And so we're going to talk about that, bring in the latest details, information that we have that surround the Georgia high school shooting. But first, we want to say thank you to our premier sponsors, BJU Press Homeschool. They make it possible for us to have conversations like this. They make it possible for us to bring this podcast to you. And also, they make it possible for us to educate our kids at home with confidence that what they are learning is not going to rival the truth or rival the holiness of God. If that is something that interests you, look, we recently talked about the Surgeon General advisory that said or suggested that parents are afraid that their kids are going to die in a mass school shooting.
Yeah.
Parents are experiencing stress and anxiety because they are afraid that they're going to drop their kids off at school and then go back to the school with police cars and ambulances lined up, taking their kids out. I mean, that is horrific to think that we live in a country that type of trauma is so normal that parents describe that as a part of their daily regular stress. Well, let me just tell you, you can remove that stressor.
Yeah.
Okay. There are many things that you can't control, some things that you just are going to have to navigate and work through. But that is one that you do not have to have. Bring your kids home, and BJU Press Homeschool will help you do that. Look, we have options. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit passionate. I'm talking about our sponsor. I am so sorry. I'm just looking at the information that is in front of us that we are going to talk about today. And it angers me that this is happening in our country. And we want to pretend as if the guns are personified. as if the guns are the problem, that the guns walk themselves into schools or into offices and shoot and take the lives of innocent people. No, it's not. It's the people on the other ends of the guns and what we refuse to acknowledge about those people that keep us in this place.
That's right.
Okay. I'm sorry. That's all tangled up. Here's what I wanted to say. Thanks to bjupresshomeschool.com for making this podcast possible, where we get to talk about these issues and not check over our shoulder. Who's going to let us discuss it? Okay. Check out our friends at bjupresshomeschool.com. That's bjupresshomeschool.com. Let them know that the Addison sent you. All right. So this is an article from CNN. I'm just jumping right into this, right? The Georgia high school shooting suspect and his father make their first court appearances. They do not enter pleas. It's important to note that the father is now also being charged, okay, in this Georgia school shooting. Let me give you the details here. 14-year-old Appalachia High School student and his father, who are both charged in connection with a shooting at the Georgia school that left 2 students and 2 teachers dead earlier this week, appeared in court Friday, both declining to enter a plea to the charges against them. Colt Gray was arraigned in Borough County courtroom on 4 counts of felony murder stemming from a school shooting that's left a small community grieving. Officers escorted the teenager into the courtroom shackled, his long hair obscuring parts of his face throughout the proceeding. In court, Judge Curry Mingledorf informed Gray of his rights and initially said that the maximum penalty in his case was the death sentence or life in prison. He later called Gray back into the courtroom to correct the maximum penalty, telling the teen that because of his young age, the maximum he could face was life in prison with or without parole. The teen's legal counsel did not ask for bond to be set during the hearing. Prosecutors allege Gray fired an AR-style rifle on campus Wednesday morning, killing 4 people, according to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. 9 others were injured. All but 2 of them were shot. The injuries, all but 2 of them were the result of being shot. Minutes after his son was escorted out of the same courtroom, Gray's father, Colin Gray, 54 years old, was arraigned on 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter, 2 counts of second-degree murder, and 8 counts of cruelty to children. Colin Gray entered the courtroom shackled in a white and gray jumpsuit and appeared emotional throughout the hearing, rocking back and forth as the judge informed him of his rights and the charges against him. His voice broke at times as he addressed the court. Like his son, Colin Gray did not ask for bond at his first appearance, where he was represented by a public defender. Mingledorf said the father faces a maximum possible penalty of 180 years in prison. There's more to be read and more to be said on this issue, but let me pause at this moment. We are now increasingly seeing a precedent where the parents who show negligence, who almost seem to be complicit in providing a way or a means by which their own kids, who the courts obviously are saying you should know that your kid has an issue that would prevent or would prohibit your kid owning a weapon or using a weapon. Now we see increasingly parents are now being charged. Your thoughts on this, Will Great?
Yeah, it's one of those things where I look at it, I'm like, well, man, I have 2 thoughts about it.
Yeah.
On one side, I'm like, wow. So now the parents are could be responsible for what the child has done, but then on the other side, I'm like, man, yes, the parents should be responsible in a way that if they have not done what they're supposed to do, if they have been negligent, then there is some fault there. And so it's one of those things where it's kind of difficult to me, because I'm like, well, that young man he did it, the dad didn't. But at the same time, this shows us that the government is like, y'all need to take care of your children. Like at the end of the day, you need to take care of your son, your children, and it seems like all the other times it's like, no, we are taking care of your children.
Yes.
But now when something like this happens, it's like, no, you're at fault because you need to take care of your child. Like,
it's interesting
crazy.
because we were just having this conversation where we were talking about, how the school system almost sees itself as like the gatekeeper of kids, that the school system, the public school system, the government education kind of swoops in to aid parents because parents just don't know what they're doing. And as we look at sort of in recent history, the debate, and why is it even a debate over what parents get to know about their kids, increasingly the entity that seems to be in charge of the kid is the school. It's the administration. So now we're having discussions about whether or not parents can be informed about the sexual confusion of kids and them not knowing who they are, or maybe keeping it a secret how they choose to identify, using their preferred pronouns, using their specified names while they are at the school, but then making sure that the parents don't know that. It's very interesting to me that these are the kinds of conversations that we're having in this country. And at the same time, we are saying, well, no, actually, you didn't pull the trigger, Dad, but you got to know your child.
Exactly.
You got to know your child. And let me read some more from this piece just here, because I think this is important. So this is, so what the arrest warrant suggests is not just that the dad gave his son a gun. Okay. But it is that the dad should have known that the son actually was mentally unstable, and also that the dad should have been aware of a previous investigation where his son was questioned. Both he and his son were questioned. And so then the dad should have been like, maybe don't give the kid an AR style rifle. Like maybe let's not do that. Okay. So here we go. The arrest warrant for Colin Gray alleges he gave his son a firearm, quote, with knowledge that he was a threat to himself and others. The shooting suspect questioned about an online threat last year. Okay. This is what we know, that the son was questioned about an online threat just last year. Here are the details. In May of 2023, law enforcement officials questioned Colt Gray and his father, about online threats to commit a school shooting that included photos of guns, according to a joint statement from FBI Atlanta and the Jackson County Sheriff's Office. Colt Gray, who was 13 at the time, told investigators during that interview that, quote, someone is accusing him of threatening to shoot up a school, stating that he would never say such a thing, even in a joking manner, end quote. Authorities could not substantiate the threats, and the investigation was closed, according to the sheriff's office. Here's the other thing that's important to note about that. Colt's father bought him the weapon. Before the charges against Colin Gray were announced on Thursday, two law enforcement sources with direct knowledge of the investigation said he told authorities he purchased the AR-style rifle used in the Appalachia High School shooting as a holiday present for his son in December of 2023. That would put the gun purchase just months after authorities initially contacted Colin Gray and his family as they investigated a school shooting threat last year. So if you're not following this, let me just make it clear. We are investigating your son because there allegedly seems to be some online threats he's made about shooting up a school. And then just a few months later, the dad bought him an AR style rifle.
Yep.
I mean,
no, I think that definitely fault there. Like, and look, the dad is at fault because they had this investigation, and he after that bought the gun. Like, what are you doing? What are you doing? And so I think precedent has been set, like from that Michigan case, I believe it was, and I what I hope would happen from that is that parents would be very mindful of their firearms, not to have them in places where their children can just get them. And of course, not give the weapon to their children.
Yes.
I would hope that would begin to shape how parents look at their guns and stuff like that. But man, this situation, this case, he's at fault. The dad is at fault.
Yeah, I think my big issue that I have with this, it's the Crumbleys. I wanted to just look it up to make sure that I had their name right here. Yeah, the Crumbleys in Michigan, where both parents were actually charged in the crimes that their son Ethan committed, where he shot and killed 4 classmates inside Oxford High School in Michigan back in 2021. Look, I think that the issue here is that you can't have it both ways. This is the problem that I have with this discussion, where we live in a time where our society and our culture is actually saying that the parents are the enemies of the kids and that the kids almost need to be protected from the parents. But then when the kids go off the rails, at least further off the rails or farther off the rails than we want them to go. Okay. Because make no mistake about it, our culture does want a certain amount of like off the railness.
Right.
Okay. Right. But when they go beyond what we want, and it also serves our political narrative, okay, then we want the parents to be responsible. So there's that. I have that in one basket that I am pondering as we talk about this. But then I also have the reality that, look, regardless of what the culture is saying, parents, you need to know your children. And so if you've got this dad who just a year ago, there was even a question about your son making some threats online about shooting up a school. Okay. I don't think months later you go out and arm him.
Right. No.
That's just basic level for me. Okay. Right. Here's the other thing that I think is important about this Appalachia High School shooting. Appalachia High School received a phone threat on Wednesday morning before shots rang out on the school's campus, warning of shootings that would happen at 5 schools, including Appalachia High School. This is according to multiple law enforcement officials as they reported this information to CNN. Now, here are my questions. Okay, where did these calls come from? So they're saying they have not identified the callers. Well, you better get on that. Right. Where did these calls come from? Wow. How did we have this type of warning? Why is this happening? But even as I look at all of this, you can, cue the vultures, right? Cue the people who, for them, this story means that, there is no Second Amendment. People do not have the right to bear arms. Cue the vultures who are going to make this the fault of the absent parents. All right. I was reading this piece. This was over at MSNBC, which is just a bastion for like truth and unbiased reporting. Right. And I thought this is so interesting to me. So it's written by an opinion columnist, a man named Frank Figliuzzi. That's probably not how you say his last name, but we're just going to go with it. Okay. Frank Figliuzzi. My goodness. A man named Frank is an opinion columnist over at MSNBC. And this is what he writes. The horrific school shooting in Georgia didn't have to happen. It didn't have to happen. And then he says, here's what parents can do to help stop the next one. Well, of course, I perked up because anyone who's got the all-encompassing answer to the question, why are our kids going off the rails? Well, I want to hear. Okay. And then when you can tell us what we need to do as parents, I also want to hear that. All right. So this is what he writes. He says, here's the thing about school shootings. The response can be flawless and the outcome can still be horrific. On Wednesday morning, 2 students and 2 teachers at Appalachia High School in Georgia took their last breaths after being shot by a 14-year-old. 9 others at the school were wounded during the mass shooting. Moments after the first shots were fired, screens in classrooms flashed the message, hard lockdown. Well-rehearsed students pushed desks and chairs up against classroom doors to form barricades, even after more shots echoed through the halls. School resource officers quickly confronted the shooter, who dropped to the ground and surrendered. EMS responders sped to the scene and tended to the casualties. It was an exceptional response to an event, he writes, that should have never happened.
Okay.
I agree with that. Okay. A 14-year-old shouldn't have a gun, shouldn't bring it to school, shouldn't kill 4 people and wound 9 others. Teachers shouldn't die at the hands of a student, and a student shouldn't perish during second period algebra. It's questionable about whether or not a 14-year-old should have a gun, because you can think about the various generations of 14-year-olds who have had guns but didn't bring them to school. This forces us to ask the question, what has changed in our country that now we say 14-year-olds can't have guns? Because there was a time in this country where 14-year-olds could have rifles, they could have guns, and they could act responsibly under the supervision of their family.
Well, I would say, given where we are as a country morally, 14-year-old kids probably shouldn't have guns.
Because think about what is in the heart and the mind of a 14-year-old, and think about the images and think about the narratives that are in front of 14-year-olds that would suggest for them that there is an alternative use for the firearm that they have.
Right.
So no longer are we hunting, no longer are we outdoorsmen, no longer are we thinking, well, we need to know how to defend our domain should someone rush up on our home. No longer are we thinking that. But what we are thinking is that we are all just highly evolved animals. And what we are thinking is that, there's a certain amount of celebrity that goes along with mass school shootings. And we're going to talk about that. That's important to this discussion, right? Because people are like going, well, why would a 14-year-old shoot up a school? Well, it turns out that they've actually done a whole lot of research on the psychology behind these mass shooters. What are they thinking? Why are they doing this? Even down to the ones who are shooting up schools. And do you know what one of their top reason for shooting up schools is? That they want to be Columbine famous.
Wow.
And wouldn't you know it? Famous. In the same week, let me pause and then pivot for a second, because wouldn't you know it, in the same week that we've got a school shooting happening in Georgia, we've got the Nashville school shooters journals being released and more information coming out. And wouldn't you know,
a long time.
Oh my goodness, it took an awful long time.
Man.
But wouldn't you know that she wanted to be Columbine famous?
Wow.
All right, here we go. Nashville school shooter Audrey Hale wrote a journal entry that she hoped to make the Columbine shooters proud when she opened fire on her former Christian elementary school, killing 6 people. Quote, I want my massacre to end in the way that Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold would be proud of, Hale wrote in scribbled print at the bottom of a ruled page in her journal. This is according to evidence photos of the book obtained and published by the Tennessee Star. There's been a major battle over the release of these documents, the release of these journals. And I can understand that the family members of those children who lost their lives and of those adults who lost their lives, the family members are saying, no, we do not want to make her famous from the grave. I totally understand that. But there's information in these journals that I think that there's a bigger picture here. It's not just for the sake of having something that is, salacious. It's not just for the sake of we want to know her thoughts and what made her tick. But in a way, we kind of do. And I think we've got a mainstream media that doesn't want us to know her thoughts and what made her tick, because as it turns out, she was sexually confused. She was confused over her identity. She lamented not having male genitalia and never being able to engage in the type of activity that she wanted to engage in with females. So why do we need to know that information? Because this also goes into the reports of the psychology of shooters. Because this helps us understand those who are unstable among us.
Yeah.
But if we can't have those conversations, if we can't say, hey, listen, we actually have some data out that suggests there's a profile of these shooters. And they fall into about 4 or 5 different categories. And we've actually been able to track what makes them tick. But if we can't have that conversation and we want to talk about how we prevent this, you're never going to prevent it.
Right.
Because you're not going to be able to put your finger on the thing that's actually causing it. Yeah. And that is the confusion. That is the demonic confusion that exists in our culture today.
That's right. They will be exposed. And so the thing is, you got to wonder why it took so long to get these journals. And like you said, there's a big battle over it, but it's a battle. If it was someone who was deemed to be conservative, who was deemed to be someone who supported like President Trump,
come on,
man, those journals would have been out the next week. It goes against what's in there. They knew it goes against what they are trying to push. And so it will cause more controversy for them, if they were released. And so, and like you said, understand the families, they have a different reason why, but the mainstream media and all these people, they don't want their cover to be blown by what's in these documents.
Right.
That's the bottom line.
Because at the heart of this, what we have is we have a mainstream media. We have a social media. We have basically a cultural construct that is creating this type of mental instability, normalizing it, removing the parents from the scenario where the parent would step in to defend and protect the child and lead the child to mental stability and safety. Right. And then turning around after the results reach their full end. Okay, that you have situations like this, that you have situations like the Covenant School shooting, and then turning around and then going to the parents and saying, where were you? When and look, there is parental responsibility. I mean, we are going to sing that until we meet the Lord. Okay. Yeah. You must be responsible for your children. But the point that I am ultimately making here is that the parents are doing that against the grain in this culture today.
Yeah.
Definitely. Because we are in a culture that says to the parents, no, you step back, we'll take it from here.
Except when something like this happens.
Boom. That's why I say, you know, when we talk about this idea that there's quote unquote always been this collective view, you know, that parents believe that those are our children and but when they believe that those children are the results of, or the responsibilities of entire communities. You know, I've always joked about that. And I'm like, but how is it that, so we don't see a community being charged with involuntary manslaughter. We don't see online influencers being charged with involuntary manslaughter.
Right.
I mean, that's going to be difficult to stick. That's going to be difficult to pin. And yet what we are supposed to believe is that when the parents fail, they are solely responsible. Now, do I think that even the question of whether or not there was online activity associated with threats to take people's lives, do I think that should have been validated or even overlooked by giving your child a weapon? No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. But I do not think that should be considered in a vacuum. I think we do ourselves a disservice when we say, oh, it's just the dad here. Oh, it's just the parents up in Michigan. Although that case, when you look at it in total, I mean, they were seriously checked out. There were a lot of issues there surrounding that. But I think when we start to recognize and get comfortable identifying the profile of these types of shooters, right, then we can have a real conversation. But until then, we're going to keep talking around the issue and keep talking about the guns, these personified weapons. Okay. Right. Like where they just walk into schools and shoot kids, the guns themselves. Right. And not talking about what's on the other end of the gun, what's driving the other end of the gun. All right. Back to this MSNBC story. Where they're lamenting that, yes, okay, the responders did what they were supposed to do, and we are celebrating that, but this should have never happened. Look, I agree with that, okay? But where this opinion piece ultimately ends up, I vehemently disagree with, right? Okay, so here we go. We celebrate heroic responses and reflexive reactions imprinted on the brains of a generation of children and first responders, though first responders through endless active shooter drills. Then we mourn the senseless deaths of those who didn't make it. It's a paradox, of course, two truths that seem contradictory because they are, he writes. That's because a large segment of America is approaching this the wrong way. The folks who don't want to talk about root causes will limit themselves to singing the praises of those who professionally spring into action to lock down, shoot down, and clean up the carnage. Wow, what a beautifully written line there. Let me say this, though. When we talk about root causes, that's beautiful to write that because you think the root cause is the gun.
Yeah.
But those of us who want to talk about the root cause.
The real cause. Yeah, the real root cause.
It's the ones who want to talk about what's holding the gun or who's holding the gun and what's motivating the person who's holding the gun. But alas, that's not the conversation that these columnists want to have.
Because it has to flip back to that, because there is an agenda to be pushed. You know, it always has to default to that. You notice it every time. Then there's this big uprising about, guns and like you said, like that guns are the problem. And they never look at, or if they look at the person, it's all about just mental health. It's either guns or it's mental health. And we don't say anything about personal responsibility. We don't say anything even about the depths of the soul that we have a moral issue in this country.
What's fueling the mental health crisis? So if we come back to mental health, What is fueling that crisis? What is it about certain people that kind of unmoors them when they walk through struggles or when they have been bullied? Because I am aware that in this whole conversation, there are the reports that come out. Well, this kid was bullied for years. Okay, so what is it about this kid that causes this kid to want to take other people's lives as a result of bullying? And I am not at all in favor of, nor am I supporting bullying, and no one should mistake me for saying that. But what I'm saying is, or what I'm asking is, what makes this kid different from the other kids who were bullied and then go on to lead productive lives that they're able to overcome it? But we don't want to have those conversations. There are these sort of like, almost in medical terms, comorbidities. So you've got the person who is bullied, but then also maybe sexually confused. And then also maybe, getting these mixed messages online and being discipled online and being trained online. But we don't want to talk about that. We want to just kind of like, speed right by that and go for the guns that shoot themselves.
Yeah.
The guns that shoot themselves. All right. Back to this opinion piece from MSNBC, because I want to ultimately kind of wrap up what I think the outrage ought to be, but then look at how our hands have been tied in this country. We are not even able to have a conversation about the profiles of shooters because we are not allowed to ask the most important questions, right? So when we talk about mental health, we can talk about depression. We can talk about ideology. We are suicide ideation. We can talk about anxiety, right? But what we cannot talk about is how the person identified. Did the person feel trapped in the wrong body? Did the person fantasize about making other people pay for his or her own discomfort? Did the person have those kinds of thoughts? No, we can't talk about that because we actually normalize that in our culture. I mean, you just look at some of the TikTok videos that are out there where we openly allow for people to talk about making other people suffer because they feel violently attacked by people's words. We normalize that, and we do not say that is a mental crisis. That is a psychological mental episode that needs to be addressed. No, we just normalize that. It's like, just TikTok speak. They're just this is their expression. We have a huge problem. Back to this piece. So this person writes, here are my top 4 questions for parents to pose to school leaders. So, because remember, this writer over at MSNBC is talking about how we can prevent these school shootings. Okay. So here are the top 4 ways that he has arrived at, that parents can help to prevent these types of school shootings. And you should be all ears at this point, because certainly I am. Here's the first thing. First, ask your school administrators if there is a behavioral threat assessment and management team. A behavioral threat assessment and management team. These multidisciplinary teams often include a school counselor or a psychologist, school resource officer, a senior teacher, school nurse, and an administrator. They meet regularly to discuss concerns brought to their attention about a student's conduct as it relates to potential violence and to decide the best course of action. Oh, pause for a second, though, because I'm concerned about the bias of this team. I'm concerned about when they meet together, what they actually will define as a psychological episode. Like I'm wondering if, these people who feel like they are disembodied spirits looking to be placed in the right body, I'm wondering if that is a type of psychosis that you would then be able to identify. Because see, if you can't do that, then your team is flawed. Okay, if your team will not identify certain psychological markers for which we should be concerned, then you've got a flawed team.
Oh, they can't do it. Not in this atmosphere. That can't be a reason for anything that would happen that would be out of pocket.
Well, then
that can't be a reason.
So then on number 1. So then what's the point of the behavioral threat assessment and management team? Because number 1, there are certain things that you're just not going to assess. And in fact, all of us have to pretend that we don't see. All right. Number 2, ask how or if your school is reporting by students and employees about potential violence, also known as, quote, bystander reporting. Your school should make it easy for everyone to share their concerns with identified personnel, including anonymously. But it's interesting because what about the kids who say they feel threatened by other kids who identify as a different gender and then want to be in their changing spaces? Oh, whoa. What about that reporting?
No.
And they say that makes me uncomfortable. I feel threatened by that. And he's like, shh, you don't report that.
That type of reporting is actually violence.
Correct. Correct. So you can see how this is a joke. Already, this is a joke. Right? Because we don't really want students to tell us when they feel uncomfortable. We don't really want them to do that. We want them to feel the way the liberal left, you've given them their emotions and you want them to just reflect those emotions back to you. You don't really want them to say what makes them uncomfortable or what they don't like or what they would prefer was not. You don't really want that. So this is a nice piece and it's powerful in its impact for anyone who doesn't have a brain. Like we are allowed to see what we see, that we live in a culture where our kids are being confused and it's become rote. So now so many people don't even notice it because it's just what happens to kids. They are being confused. They are questioning things that generations ago, even just years ago, they never would have questioned.
Right.
And we have normalized that.
Right.
Because the indoctrination has reached its full measure. Number 3, he writes, MSNBC, ask your school leadership to explain how they proactively identify and address bullying. Available data strongly suggests that many school shooters have been bullied, often repeatedly by their peers. In what way? Let's talk about it. Because this is the moment of the everything but generation.
Yeah.
If you can be anything but just who you were meant to be by God, and you will be celebrated.
Yeah.
Anything but.
Yeah, and the bullying is it can only go a few ways. Like if I feel like I'm being bullied because everything that is coming at me is saying I have to accept or use these pronouns or do this stuff, and I feel like, man, they're really trying to push me to do this. I can't report that.
Come on.
It only goes a few ways. There's certain ways that the bullying will not go.
I mean, the girl who goes on a field trip with her class, but the boy identifies as a girl and the teachers outright make her keep quiet so that the boy can sleep in the room with the girls.
Yeah, I remember that stuff.
Even sharing a bed. Like, so, but if she says, man, I was bullied into silence, like, can she report that? That's my question. I'm just,
it only goes certain ways.
You understand. 4th and final suggestion from this columnist, ask your high school administrator if there is a peer counseling program. Yes, because that's where the wisdom comes from, the peers. A peer counseling program at the high school. These programs, led by a faculty member with mental health training, have helped or have proven to help tackle depression and suicidal ideation. It's no secret that kids trust their peer group.
Of course. Remember a story in the Bible.
And come on. And all of the wisdom that comes from trusting the people who have lived the same amount of years that you've lived.
Right.
And are processing the same exact way that you're processing, maybe even worse. Let's get them all in a room to help them make sense of the world that they are all confused about, where they are getting the same messages all at the same time from the same outlets. Let's get them all in a room. And by the way, let's put the adult in the room so that it can feel legitimate. But really, we understand how this social justice works, right? The people that are considered to be the dominant group, which that's going to be the adults when you're talking about kids, what you're tasked with doing is just kind of sitting and listening. Because you have not earned the right to speak. You're there as a faculty advisor who gets the privilege of sitting and listening. All right. So then what you have is you have the residents sort of running the asylum. So you've got the kids who are confused, but not getting any type of outside wisdom, just kind of like working it out among themselves. Like, oh yeah, I feel the same way because I was watching this TikTok.
Right, right.
Oh my goodness, yeah, I was just thinking the same thing. My favorite YouTuber.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we want. That's those are our suggestions. That's what we end up. Let me say this, and because this blows my mind here. It is also essential to remember that parents play the paramount role in preventing the unthinkable at school. Oh, do we now?
Parents.
Thank you for that parental nod.
Okay.
We appreciate it. Maintaining an open dialogue with your child must start early in their life. Wait, hold on a second. And become a part of their everyday existence. Oh, look at this. Now, this is a sermon here.
Parents to be involved.
A shared meal, a car ride home, or some joint activities are often the best times to learn more about what's happening in your child's life and within their peer group. Really, except for the fact that you advocate secrecy.
Yeah. Don't tell your parents.
Look.
Like, we know that this is happening. Like, no, there's no reason. Just come to the counselor here at school. Don't tell the parents. Like, oh my goodness.
So let me
schizophrenic like that.
Let me read the article that was written in the Atlantic. We talked about this last week. Okay. Maybe we finished it this week. Here we have written by Jerusalem Demsis, okay, in the Atlantic, staff writer for the Atlantic. This was the piece that we discussed, back to school, freedom at last. Remember, where they opine that the parents just can't handle their kids. And so we need schools because schools do the jobs that parents think they can do, but we all know they can't. And if parents are honest, they will acknowledge that they can't. So in the one basket, okay, you've got the MSNBC opinion writer saying, parents, try to foster relationship. Parents, we need you to step in. Parents, you may be the first line of blah, 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 blah. And then on the other hand, we've got the Atlantic staff writer who writes this in the final paragraph of the back to school, free at last thing. Okay.
My God Almighty.
Right. Here we go.
The universe. Okay.
Thank the universe.
Man.
All right. I'm very sympathetic to the argument that we expect too much from schools and teachers without providing them adequate support. But the problem isn't viewing schools as also serving these broader functions. The problem is not equipping them with the resources to adequately do so. And perhaps this is the hardest pill to swallow. Watch this. Even without adequate resources, schools still play the role of keeping an eye on kids, freeing mothers to work, reducing crime, lowering hunger, and watching for signs of abuse. Whether they are closed for President's Day or because of a teacher strike or a pandemic, the cost isn't just a few points on a standardized test. It may well be the stability of an entire community.
Wow.
Whoa,
okay,
wait.
In light
so
of Georgia.
I want the community and I want the school officials to all go show up right now. Okay. I want you guys to all go show up because you stand alongside. Is it Colin Gray? Right. So you go and stand alongside this man and say, you know what? Our responsibility here, as the parent, we failed. So we would like to go ahead and each of us, do we have enough of those gray and white jumpsuits? Because we would each like to come and stand alongside this man. Look, and I think some people are going to hear me trying to absolve Mr. Gray of his responsibility. That is absolutely what I'm not trying to do.
Mine too.
What I'm trying to say is he absolutely has a responsibility to his son, even while living in a culture that says he does not.
Right. Again, the culture cries out that, no, you don't have the responsibility. It's us. It's the school. We keep an eye, out for abuse. We watch and make sure there's no violence, except for when things like this happen, and it's all you, bro. It's you.
So my frustration on this Friday news haul as we look, a week of looking at what happened in Georgia. And by the way, man, I have a clip that we wanted to play because what came out of this and, the immediacy in the response and looking at the trauma that these dear kids are suffering. You have a 14-year-old young boy who is recounting what he experienced, being in a classroom that was one of the classrooms that took fire. And he's talking about what he experienced. And we're supposed to just say, well, we don't need to examine the mental capacities of these kids. We don't need to talk about what their influencers are communicating to them or what we are normalizing in our society. And it is not weapons, right? It is what you do with those weapons.
That's right.
It's what makes you famous, what makes you go down in history. We're not willing to have those conversations. All right, here we go.
Shooting like 10 times. He shot at least 10 times. And then I ran to the back of the classroom. I dived behind the desk, and my teacher had got in front of me like he was guarding me. But like the gunshots were so close to me, like my ears started ringing real bad. Like the whole classroom was smoking, like, and everything. And then when he finally got out of the classroom, my teacher started barricading the door with desks and bookshelves and all that. And then I had got up. I had saw one of my classmates on the ground bleeding so bad. And then when I had moved myself to the other side of the room, because the bookshelf I was hiding behind, it was right in front of the door. So I had moved to the other side, to like this side with my friend. And I was checking on my other friend because he got grazed in his leg. And then there was a white girl that was in front of me. She got shot in her leg and stuff. And then my other friend got shot in her stomach, and it was just so sad.
Let me just stop right there. It was just so sad. Okay, so here's what we know. We have profiles of mass shooters. Okay. And they fall into 5 different categories. Okay. So you've got the K-12 shooters, you got the college and university shooters, the workplace shooters, the place of worship shooters, and shooters at commercial locations. So this is going to be your stores and your restaurants. And what we understand is that there is a different motivation or a different profile for each of these categories. So because of what we're talking about, let's look at the K-12 shooters. Okay. K-12 shooters are typically white males, typically students or former students of the school with a history of trauma. Most are suicidal, and they plan their crime extensively and make others aware of their plans at some point before the shooting. They use multiple guns that they typically steal from a family member. Let me say something else. This article, and this is from Vice back in 2019. There's a piece in this article that discusses the profiler or the criminal as seeking fame and what drives, especially those K-12 shooters. Listen to this. The percentage of shooters driven by a desire for fame has risen substantially in the last 5 years. This study has found in the first 15 years of the 21st century, some 3% of perpetrators were motivated by the desire to go down in history as a mass shooter. Between 2015 and 2019, that number jumped to 12%. One specific motivator for fame seekers remains strangely persistent through the years, and that is Columbine, the high school massacre.
Wow.
What is it that is this is an internal sickness. And it's not just, oh man, psychologically speaking, or man, we need to look at the psychiatry of this. Okay, yes, I'm grateful that we are able to look at these things. But what we are talking about is almost, it feels like a full court press against our children and against their minds and their hearts that then graduates to something that becomes more akin to demonic activity than it does just like, hey, I'm having a psychotic episode.
Yeah.
I mean, what does the enemy come to do?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like these things have his marks all over it. But we as parents have pulled back. We have stepped back. We should be able to talk about these things. Now you've got parents. Parents are too afraid, number one, too afraid to talk about it, too afraid to talk about the changes they see in their children. Our children are dark. They are reading dark literature. They love dark novels. They enjoy dark streaming platforms. And parents are checked out. They don't care. They don't want to look into it. They don't want to disciple their children. They want to show up all confused, not knowing what's going on. But as our kids grow darker and darker in this world, dabbling in the occult, parents are checked out. We don't want to give credit to whom credit is due. That there is a common enemy of our soul. And parents would rather be distracted in other places doing other things than step in and defend their kids. And then you couple that with a collective narrative that tells parents every single day, you're inept. You can't. You just can't. Leave it to us. But now when we fail, when we don't step in and reduce crime, government schools, when we don't step in and reduce crime, when we don't step in and protect the children, well, then, it was the parents' fault. Like everything good that happens, we will take credit for.
Right.
And all of the missteps, we will blame the parents for. And then you've got parents who are too afraid to even say, I think I might take my kid out. And then own that. And then say, no, you know what? I'm going to make the decision to educate my kid at home. That's what I'm going to do. Like parents can't even be brave enough to do that because, well, that's crazy talk. That's crazy. How is your kid going to be socialized if you educate your kid? I'm sorry, wait, what? And what exactly do you mean by socialization? Like, do you mean interaction with people? Because I'm going to count myself as a person. I'm going to count my family structure as people living together in a social setting where there is, socialization without the fear of a TV screen having to flash, take cover. You're under attack. Push the desk up against the door. I'm going to take my chances that I don't have to have my 14-year-old talking about watching a fellow classmate bleed out in the classroom. I'm going to take my chances on that.
Yeah.
And you know what?
Yeah.
Increasingly, I'm going to be loud about that.
Yeah.
Because they have won the war because they silenced the Christians. They've won because they make us afraid to say anything. So now gender confusion is not a mental issue. So that if it's not a mental issue, how do we can't diagnose the issue? Because I'm out on that. I am out. And if you need modern language to help you understand where I am, what I'm saying is, man, I'm just my compassion won't let me ignore the real symptoms. Come on, it's not just the guns, man. It's not just the guns. It's all of it. It's all of it. It's the whole ball of wax. All of it comes into play. It's how our kids are being discipled hours and hours a day on social media. What's shaping their minds and their hearts, how they think, how they process. It's interesting to me, and maybe there'll be some, psychoanalysis done on this particular Georgia shooter. The fact that when the resource officer showed up, he dropped his weapon and fell to the ground.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me because it didn't seem, at least just looking at it from the surface, that he actually wanted to die.
Yeah, it does not usually end like this.
No.
So this was different, and maybe we'll know, more of what happened. But it usually ends in self-inflicted, gunshot or having to be taken down.
Man, I don't know what we immediately do as far as how the fame aspect and the notoriety of this. And to that extent, I can understand how the Covenant school shooter, how the victims of this woman didn't want her journals published. I can understand that they did not want to make her famous. I do feel, though, that the public has a right to know what motivated this act of violence, and that it was an ideological motivation, that there was a hatred for Christians, that there was a hatred for heteronormativity. Like, that's important to note. Now, I'm not saying that we need to go back to those 1999 days where the mainstream media descended upon Columbine High School, and it was just it was everywhere. And so you've got generations of kids who are aware of this, and that contributes to their mental instability. But man, there's got to be a way that we can balance that out. You know?
Yeah. And I'm gonna just say, just the fact that they can have categories for these different mass shootings, like who, that tells me that there's definitely principalities and spiritual things behind it, because that's familiar spirits.
Yes.
You know, so they have some of the same components in these different categories, you know, throughout the different. And so that tells me, man, we know that this is spiritual at its core.
Yeah.
We know that we have a morality problem in this country. We have people who are away from God. We have a godless nation. Let's be real.
Come on.
The things that are being put out there constantly, the things that our children are being bombarded with, like you already talked about, it does something to the spirit of a person, the soul. And so what we're seeing is the manifestation of so much of that. So much of that. We have to look there and say, okay, we understand as Christians that this is not just a physical thing. This is not just about guns. You know, man, there's something going on in this country. And a lot of times, man, we as Christians are so dull and in not discerning that we don't even, that we fold right into the narrative sometimes.
Yeah.
It's sad.
It is sad. And it grieves me. My encouragement is to parents, man, do your job. Do your job, you know, like, and I'm not saying that, you know, we are not affected by tragedy as parents. No matter how hard we try, we are affected by tragedy. There are things that happen that are really beyond our control. But man, let it be that it was beyond your control. The things that you can control, do that and own it. Don't make apologies to people for simply showing up to parent. Like just go ahead and parent. And there are going to be people who don't like it, but they can do what they would like to do with their own children. Oh, that's right. They don't want to have any, but they would love to step between you and your child and your God-given role to shepherd, to steer, to shape, and ultimately to point to the saving knowledge of Jesus Christ. Man, step aside. Step aside. When we resist those cultural trends that rival the truth, we remain culture proof. Until next time, Lord willing.
God bless.